It's now my distinct honor to introduce our morning speaker. Of course, yesterday we heard the strategic view from Washington from the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. We also got the senior service perspective and the Type Commander perspective from our panelists yesterday and from our keynote, Bob Work. So today I think it's more than appropriate that we hear from the person in the Pacific who sits atop the operational and administrative chain of command for the entire Navy in the Pacific. He commands an area extending from the West Coast all the way out to the Indian Ocean to the India-Pakistan border. Admiral Cecil Haney is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. He's a submariner. He's commanded at the ship, squadron, and group level. Ashore, his tours have included Office of the Secretary of Defense Comptroller, Navy staff as Director for Navy Warfare Integration, more recently as Deputy Commander, U.S. Strategic Command. Admiral Haney assumed command of the Pacific Fleet in January 2012. So now, 1 year on, we're very honored to get his perspective this morning. Let's welcome our keynote speaker, Admiral Cecil Haney.
Well, good morning and aloha. Glad to see there's some folks out there that know what to do with that word. It's great to be back here in San Diego, America's finest city, and of course, a Navy town. Thank you, Pete, for that kind introduction and your continued leadership of the United States Naval Institute. It's great to see you continuing your great work for our Navy in that capacity. Also, I'd like to thank Kent Snyder for your leadership of AFCEA, all the great work you do. I truly appreciate this opportunity to be here today and to address such an impressive gathering of leaders. Although some of you may wonder, why would I come all the way from Hawaii to speak at this forum? I believe it's important considering that many of you work closely with the Navy, and I want to share with you how I see the rebalance in light of today's challenges. This morning, I'd like to cover the following points. 1, the importance of our Navy in the Asian Pacific region, to include out to the Indian Ocean. 2, how we are addressing those challenges we face today in this vibrant world we live in. 3, how are we rebalancing in the Pacific Fleet? And finally, to discuss the opportunities to improve our warfighting capabilities as we continue to work together with you as partners in industry and academia. Slide. As you know, the economic engines of the world depend on the freedom of the seas for the movement of goods. Living in this globalized world, it is clearly becoming more and more interconnected and interdependent. As a maritime nation, we too are dependent on the freedom of the seas and access for the movement of commerce to and from our shores. Now, focusing on the Pacific region, the area of my operations, it accounts for 1/2 of the Earth's surface, 1/2 of the world's population, 5 treaty allies, 6 of the largest militaries, and 7 of the world's largest economies. All of these nations rely on the maritime domain for the transportation of goods. Security at sea means prosperity of shore, and any disruption to the movement of goods at sea will negatively affect the economies of nations. For decades, the United States Navy's presence in the Asia-Pacific has helped set the conditions necessary for increased economic growth and prosperity. Today, working with our friends, partners, and allies in the region, we continue to to maintain security at sea for prosperity ashore. In the South China Sea, for example, we see the flow of some $5.3 trillion in global trade. Through the Straits of Malacca, we see $1.3 trillion or so in U.S. trade each year. With that said, clearly we, the United States of America, have an interest in this area. This is why the President of the United States signed out that strategic document outlining the priorities for 21st century defense, which states, quote, "While the United States military will continue to contribute to security globally, we will, of necessity, rebalance to the Asia-Pacific." Slide. Just look at the change of several key cities in the Asia-Pacific over the last 50 years or so due to their growth and prosperity. Due largely to free and unfettered access to the maritime domain enabled by maritime security. Now, given our interest in this region, the United States has played and will continue to play a vital role in maintaining that security well into the future. This is important due to the increasing uncertainty we see in this region. Slide. Starting with North Korea. Given the nuclear weapons ambition of its young leader, we should be reminded of this surprise 3 years ago in March when the South Korean corvette Cheon was suddenly and deliberately sunk by a North Korean submarine. The attempted launch of a missile last April and again in December and current rhetoric about nuclear capabilities has created an atmosphere for concern. Competing claims in both the East China Sea and the South China Sea risk miscalculation as we work to promote a peaceful resolution to these disputes. State-sponsored cyber attacks on U.S. government, military, and industrial computer systems are become more and more prevalent. Additionally, global warming is changing the way of life in some countries, as shown here in the Maldives. You know, I visited Kiribati in 2012. The same problem exists there. It's predicted in up to a few decades, Kiribati, a nation of more than 100,000 people, will be underwater, requiring their displacement. The heartbeat of natural disasters continue to threaten the region, as we witnessed in Japan recently as the earthquake, creating a tsunami, resulting in nuclear disaster, or significant flooding experienced from typhoons that impacted the Philippines. I know you had various discussions on this yesterday, and I probably don't need to cover this topic, but just in case, let's talk a little bit about our financial situation. First, the continuous resolution. As has been discussed, the continuous resolution is based on last year's spending levels that do not fully cover the programs and priorities we submitted to Congress this year. The calculus of the continuous resolution has underfunded our operations and maintenance accounts by over $3 billion. We have also experienced $1.4 billion of increased expenses since last year's budget was enacted. This was from unplanned, abnormal expenses for increased naval operations in the Middle East, increased fuel costs, as well as unexpected repairs. The continuous resolution limits our flexibility to react because it does not allow us to transfer funds to other accounts into our operational accounts to address these shortfalls. In order to deal with this, we are already looking at and working on some cuts. Obviously, reduced travel and overhead, reduced participation in some of our public events, such as Fleet Weeks, Blue Angel shows, deferring some maintenance in the third quarter that we perhaps can delay and reverse those kinds of decisions as we look at our operational demands, not just in my AOR and beyond. And of course, as you've read and talked about, the business of freezing our hiring process, reducing overtime and overhead in areas. So, as you can imagine, living under a long-term continuous resolution is a big problem for us. Second, if sequestration happens, it's a whole different ball game. We would face an additional $4 to $5 billion of cuts for this year alone, further reducing our training and readiness. And of course, third, the worst case is having both the continuous resolution and the sequestration coupled together. Well, while I could go on with this, I think I'll end it by saying that I hope our political process can work to mitigate these things from happening soon, or at least giving us a crisp decision. Slide. Now let me give you a snapshot of how my Pacific Fleet is postured. Of course, as mentioned, my headquarters is located in Hawaii. And of course, the area of operation covers the waters from the polar bears to the penguins, as we look at the Arctic to the Antarctica, from Hollywood to Bollywood, as we think about from California to India, a country I just came back from. Today, I have some 96 or so ships, 41 submarines, 60 maritime sea lift ships, and over 1,000 aircraft. Almost 100,000 active duty Navy folk, just under 10,000 Navy reserves, and some 21,000 civilians that do the work here for the Pacific Fleet. Build. My type commanders are responsible, of course, for Navy air capabilities, surface ships, submarines, and Navy expeditionary combat capabilities. They are responsible for that manning, training, and equipping our forces today. I, of course, have built 2 fleets, 3rd Fleet located here in San Diego up on Point Loma, and the 7th Fleet located in Yokosuka, Japan. Together, this team is responsible for executing the maritime strategy. Slide. We work to execute our maritime strategy across the full range of military operations. That includes humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, all the way through deterrence and power projection if deterrence fails. Our rebalancing efforts further enhance our ability to carry out this strategy. Slide. As a key part of our rebalancing effort that does not make the headlines includes increasing our intellectual understanding of the Asia-Pacific region. This intellectual focus is as much a part of the strategy as it is the genesis of it. While it's good to see a lot more work being done regarding research, studies, books, and the buzz and major think tanks concentrating their efforts here, the Navy is rebalancing intellectual capital and leadership attention toward the region. First, we are sharpening our focus on the warfighting missions that are most important in the Asia Pacific, prioritizing doctrine and our concept of operations development to preserve our operational maneuver space to include, but not limited to, the air-sea battle concept. Second, we are developing our people to serve in the Asia Pacific to include revitalizing Foreign Area Officer Program as just one example. Having talented people in the region, building strong relationships is, of course, key to our success. Third, the Navy has increased efforts to ensure our allies and strengthen our partnerships. The Navy conducts more than 100 exercises and numerous training events annually with more than 20 allies, partners, and friends to increase partnership capacity to address the uncertainty in the region. With respect to advanced technology, our rebalancing execution has delivered new capabilities also in my area of operations. The next two slides will provide some examples of these capabilities. Slide. It was great for me to visit the electronic attack Growler squadrons both in Whidbey Island and in Japan last year. And most of you in this room have seen the MV-22 Osprey flying the skies of Southern California. In fact, I'm scheduled to have my first flight in the V-22 while I'm here during this particular visit. This impressive and safe aircraft is deployed to Okinawa, and I expect to see them in Hawaii in the coming years. I'm also excited to see Virginia-class submarines deploying into the Western Pacific. Just like the Virginia-class submarine North Carolina is here using one of your piers today in San Diego, I'm looking forward to more than the three I already have deploying out of Hawaii. I know many of you are familiar with the new San Antonio-class ships that are also home-ported and deploying here out of San Diego. I look forward to the opportunity to participate here real soon in the commissioning ceremony for the USS Anchorage. Soon, they will begin to be joined by a brand new amphibious assault ship, the USS America, ship I sent one of my culinary specialists to here recently. It's great to see our investments come to fruition in our shipbuilding programs. Slide. Recently, I flew aboard the new P-8 Maritime Patrol Reconnaissance aircraft while it was conducting an anti-submarine mission as it made a swing through the Pacific, demonstrating significant capabilities. I expect the first deployment to be out in the Pacific, the Western Pacific, that is. Similarly, I've been pleased with the transition of the helicopter squadrons here in San Diego to the new 60 Romeos and Sierra helicopters and their capabilities that they are bringing to our deployed carrier strike groups. And finally, I'm excited about the development of unmanned systems and the capabilities they will be bringing to the Pacific in the future, including in some of our research and development projects. In addition to modernizing capability, we are also improving our operational concepts across the range of military options. Slide. Now, part of this rebalancing effort also includes revamping some of our high-end warfighting exercises to include experimentation and the validation of new tactics, techniques, and procedures and operational concepts. You have likely heard about the upcoming littoral combat ship deployment for the spring of this year. LCS-1, the USS Freedom, will conduct a Western Pacific deployment using Singapore as a place, not a base, to conduct operations from. Our United States Marine Corps moves are also part of the rebalancing effort. A Marine Corps force spread across an area made up of self-contained units able to deploy and perform a range of military missions increases our military capabilities to respond effectively to contingencies. The Pacific Fleet is involved in support of these types of naval operations. Rebalancing also includes our increased interactions with allies, partners, and friends in the region. For example, the Rim of the Pacific exercise for 2012, that is the 23rd in its series, was the largest naval exercise in its history. We had 22 nations participating with over 25,000 personnel, more than 40 ships and submarines, and more than 200 aircraft. For the first time, we had non-U.S. officers commanding components of the combined task force during the exercise. Yes, we had Russia participating as well, and we recently invited China to participate in the Rim of the Pacific exercise for 2014. Slide. Establishing and building relationships is an important focus, of course, for this rebalance. Whether it's my fleet's interaction with nations in bilateral exercises, or training events, or leadership interactions between military, peers, and civilian leadership, the relationships we establish are critical in maintaining relevant and interoperable capabilities. For example, it was great to see Vice Admiral Yi Dingping from the Chinese Navy at the 2012 Western Pacific Naval Symposium held in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, where he and I could sit down and discuss common concerns along with the other chiefs of Navy in the region in a multilateral forum. Slide. Clearly, our rebalancing efforts must consider my top priority of warfighting readiness. We must be ready to face challenges in this region. Our readiness relies on completing the maintenance and training sides of the triangle to ensure we deploy with credible capability forward. This requires continuing to improve performance in maintenance planning and execution, as well as continuing to explore innovative new ways to improve training effectiveness. To address this, my team is working hand in hand with the U.S. Fleet Forces Command Team to scrutinize our readiness kill chains, to address gaps and seams, to improve in these areas with other stakeholders involved in this process. In order to address this rebalance effectively and address my priorities as outlined in this presentation, I'm looking to continue to leverage the talents of many of you here in this room. Slide. I know many of you in this room are supporting the efforts listed on this slide. The agenda of this conference has significant applicability as well to this list. Clearly, we must continue to enhance our ability to operate in degraded environments with innovative solutions that include capabilities that are of low signature, interoperable, able to fuse and integrate large amounts of information quickly to enhance the delivery of integrated fires. This requires cost-conscious solutions and will require the fleet to aggressively experiment and develop new approaches. The requirements listed here demand our collective focus to ensure we continually rejuvenate the intellectual capacity to sustain our world-class research and development advantages. Effective operations in the maritime domain demand our utmost respect for successful operations in the cyber and space domains. We must enable our performance in these domains in an integrated and integral fashion. Slide. Now, many of you may not recall, but our nation had just begun to rebalance to the Pacific in the late 1930s. We moved the Pacific Fleet Command from San Diego to Pearl Harbor and assets from the mainland during this time frame. And of course, on December 7th, 1941, we were surprised one early Sunday morning by an attack that destroyed a good portion of our Pacific Fleet. Recently, we also commemorated another surprise, the USS Pueblo incident with North Korea on January 23rd, 1968. We must remain vigilant with effective strategic, operational, and tactical indications and warning to avoid surprise. And if we are surprised, we must be ready to respond. Today, as we continue our rebalancing efforts, there is a lot of uncertainty in the region at home, but we can ill afford to not be ready. slide. So in closing, I want to thank each of you for your role and, of course, your interest in national security. I, for one, am glad to have you on our team. Now, speaking of a team, before I close this, I'd like to share with you one video to just give you a little bit of the heartbeat of my Pacific Fleet. Can we show the video, please? So I hope my presentation was helpful here. And before I depart to tour the San Diego waterfront, including seeing both of those littoral combat ships, Freedom and Fort Worth, I look forward to answering some of your questions. Thank you.
Good morning. Wondering if you could comment and enlighten us a bit about the rising tensions in the South China Sea and the East China Sea and how that impacts the operations that you command.
Good question. I appreciate the question. As you know, or I hope you all in here would know, it's been interesting over the years, and particularly as we look at where we are today in terms of the various friction points that are associated with sovereignty claims that overlap in the Asia-Pacific region, particularly in the South China Sea and the East China Sea. As we speak today here, it's interesting seeing that friction, whether we look and think about what may seem to be ancient history, but not so much. The business over Scarborough Reef that involves the Philippines and the Chinese, and that overlapping claim, as well as what we've seen more recently in Lintoncourt Rocks, and associated with the Koreans and the Japanese, and the frictions between the Japanese and the Chinese, more recently in the news with a certain heartbeat, associated with what we call the Senkaku area. And with each one of those, you end up with the friction point going on, military capability in some cases, or maybe it doesn't start off with military capability, it starts off with maritime surveillance capability and perhaps Coast Guard, and then it perhaps ratchets up to where military capability is looking at military capability, and of course is ripe for miscalculation. So, as others have said, and I also agree with them, it is our hope and work to ensure these disputes can be handled in accordance with international norms and have peaceful resolution. These are obviously nation-to-nation state type of issues that also involve some of our treaty allies. So we are working along with the other instruments of power of our nation in a cohesive fashion to work with our allies in particular associated with these friction points. My concern occurs, of course, is that this doesn't always get the attention of many folk, but yet it's happening on a daily basis. In the crescendoing of activity that puts military against military, as I stated earlier here, allows us that business of miscalculation. So as we go forward here, that's part of this uncertain world we live in while we continue as a nation to promote people to go to the international norms part of this. Just as you see in ASEAN and working things like the Code of Conduct and, of course, some cases taking these disputes to the United Nations. I was just in Bangladesh, and it's interesting how they managed to at least get one dispute there handled on the international stage in a peaceful way, and I think that's an example of what we in the United States of America want to happen. So I'll leave that at that in terms of where we stand in terms of those disputes. We don't pick sides, but we want to see a peaceful resolution. Next question.
Admiral, how do you think the Asia-Pacific naval leaders will react when they realize there's a mismatch between intent and ability due to our budget woes?
Well, I go around and I've visited quite a few of our countries here, partner nations, allies, friends, and quite frankly, we talk a lot about the rebalance. What does it mean? We also reflect on what we've done very recently and what we're doing today. And the thing I often tell them is, let's see this whole fiscal cycle play itself out. And then with that, we'll see real decisions associated with that. But that we have, as a country, committed from the president on down in terms of this rebalancing strategy. So don't think we're going to walk away from the Asia-Pacific region. We're going to be there.
Thank you.
Lance Leventhal with the ATCA newsletter.
Can you speak up a little bit so I can hear you?
Lance Leventhal with the ATCA newsletter. One problem I see with your refocusing is our basic orientation. All of us here who went to college took the dreaded Western Civ and English literature classes. Very few of us took the Eastern Civ and Chinese literature classes. How do we change that basic orientation?
Well, as I tried to explain a little bit in the presentation, this business of rebalancing is not just about platforms and capabilities. It also is about stimulating and developing our intellectual capacity associated with the Asia-Pacific region. That's why when I showed that slide that was up there, I tried to make sure it showed a variety of countries, because it's that entire neighborhood that matters, whereas we tend to get focused a lot on one part of it. So I think your question is astute and a good observation that we need to continue in that effort as we go forward. Next question.
Good morning, Admiral Rob Riley. You just spoke about your neighborhood, and you spoke in your remarks that you've made visits to India, Bangladesh. You can throw in Myanmar into that mix. I was wondering about your perspective of how the emerging and transitioning economies, not only in the Western Pacific but extended into the Indian Ocean, are making you pause and reflect on how you manage what to me is an ever-expanding neighborhood.
Thank you, Rob, for that question. As you look at the economies in this region, and a lot of these countries I visit are very proud of their development and where they stand, they are also circumspect over the environment that they are part of. And as they look at the development of capabilities associated with their neighbors, as they look and see where countries like China, for example, are in fact operating at in a non-transparent way, they are also concerned. So what I also see and have my team looking at, and we work with them, obviously in building partnership capacity to be able to respond to that whole range of military operations. But also what we see is a big demand signal for more and more military capability. So as they manage to increase their economy, also increasing military capability, and then it's to do what associated with it. So in some nations, we're there working with them in terms of understanding how we operate. You look at recently here having a submarine rescue exercise that was very sophisticated with India here that they were very appreciative of, for example, on a bilateral basis. Gives you one example. You look at the Rim of the Pacific exercise, and with that we also had some other trilateral exercises that booked in both sections of that, where we end up working in particular in that case with Japan and Korea together with us in terms of understanding our capability, interoperability, et cetera, associated with things like anti-submarine warfare, missile defense. And that in itself played out in a good way, I think, as we look at some of these missile launches from that uncertain nation called North Korea. So as countries build this capability, they are also learning the business of gaining experience, appreciation, as well as not just in operating platforms, but also working to attend our educational forums, which are unique because that stay time where we're bonded together, we learn from them, they learn from us, and we have an increased mutual understanding. So this plays out for me on multiple forums, and the key piece of this, as we look at a cost-conscious approach associated with our national treasure, that we in the Pacific Fleet, working for the Pacific Commander, Admiral Locklear, have a balanced approach that's consistent, that's synergized, et cetera, for the right effects and capability as we work with these nations in a variety of different ways. For example, I gave you a glimpse of RIMPAC that went from humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, to missile shots, torpedo shots, et cetera, including war shots, as well as other experimental capability that was demonstrated there. In those cases, these nations come together, not just for that month of the exercise, but they come together for a series of intellectual discussions at the commander level and other levels so that we, again, grow together. And then you look at things like the Pacific Partnership effort that we work with host nations that we support with a lot of times the glimpses over the USNS hospital ship called Mercy, or an amphibious ship, depending on the years. It vacillates back and forth. But it's not just about U.S. capability. U.S. capability bringing to bear with it joint forces. For example, the Army brings the veterinarians. And then we have our, in some cases, the U.S.-focused non-governmental organizations But in this last one, for example, again, showing a bit of the rebalance, this also included host nation local non-governmental organizations that were integrated together, and about 9 other militaries that worked together with us in order to deliver the right effects. And these effects, a lot of times you see the pictures, of course, of patients being seen and what have you, but quite frankly, the more long-terming effect that we have in some cases are the subject matter exchanges that occur in areas that those host nations are interested in to help in their capabilities. Or, for example, in helping to train how to maintain and sustain equipment that they may have gotten from a variety of different countries in the areas that we're working at. Or working side by side in the CB work, the construction area of building, for example, clinics, and those techniques that are shared from that host nation to what we understand and learn. And then we do that, and you say, well, why are we doing that? Are we wasting taxpayer dollars or what have you in terms of that particular work? Well, quite the contrary, when you look at the number of disasters, et cetera, that we have to respond collectively together in a combined way. So this business of practicing in calm to respond in crisis, clearly important. So I dwelled on that a little bit just to sort of highlight in the answering of your question, to give you that piece of from the full range of military operations and capability of our work with other nations. Hopefully that was helpful. Other questions? Never thought there would be this much silence. But I really can't say enough about your efforts together with us as we go through these turbulent seas, perhaps, in a variety of different ways, that we continue to work together in a cohesive fashion, not pointing fingers at each other, but working together for the solutions we must, not just for the Navy, but for the United States of America. Thank you.
Admiral Haney, thank you for that rundown on your vast AOR. Thank you for also sacrificing a day in Hawaii to come join us here in San Diego. Thanks for your leadership and your service. We have a token of appreciation here for you. It's a book on Allied Master Strategists about the combined chiefs in World War II. Naval Institute Press book, FCA bookmark. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Treasure that, and I'll enjoy reading it. Thank you.